So glad to be here. We're here located in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a business assurance partner. I lead our employee benefit plan audit area. And over the past year to 2 years, my practice area with employee benefit plan audit and the cybersecurity area that John leads has kind of converged.
I'm a partner in our, as mentioned, a partner in our risk advisory and compliance services group. Been at Moore Coulson for about 17 years, but been in the IT realm for about 25. My responsibilities here include leading our IT practice. Anything IT, audit related or controls related, will flow up through our team. And just excited to be here to talk about this topic. You know, we've been talking IT risk assessments for a long, long time, but now we get to call them cybersecurity risk assessments. So that's sexier and got more buzz around it. So it's an exciting time, and just looking forward to educating you guys a little bit about this today.
So in April of 2021, the Department of Labor came out with these cybersecurity best practices. Again, they're terming these best practices at this point. John's going to go through these more in detail, but this is kind of a high-level overview of what it said related to service providers. So they should have a formal, well-documented cybersecurity program, conduct prudent annual risk assessments, have a reliable annual third-party audit of security controls, clearly define and assign information security roles and responsibilities, have strong access control procedures, ensure that assets stored in a cloud or managed by a third party are subject to the appropriate security reviews, conduct periodic cybersecurity awareness training, implement and manage a secure system development lifecycle program, have an effective business resiliency program that addresses continuity, disaster recovery, incident response, encrypt sensitive data stored and in transit, implement strong technical controls in accordance with best practices, and then appropriately respond to any past cybersecurity incidents. So we're calling these kind of the Big 12 for service providers and what they need to be doing and what they're going to be asked about. And we are now seeing, you know, in addition to some of the DOL audits that are being conducted, we're seeing private plans that are reaching out to people like John and myself, asking us to do an evaluation of the service providers in light of these best practices so that they have the documentation and the comfort that their service provider is meeting these 12, or will also identify the gaps and what they need to consider in these assessments. Even beyond a lot of this, we're also seeing and talking with some attorneys that the Department of Labor is coming in and even asking about the work from home policies of some of the service providers, which is not necessarily, you would think, within the scope of these 12 items, but just based on the world we're living in and how COVID has impacted and more work from home, we're seeing even some more granular questions than what would typically be covered under these 12 items.
So we'll move into a little more detail on Big 12 that Candace just went over. And when I first saw this, when Candace first brought it to me, I was like, okay, let's see what this actually is. I wasn't expecting a whole lot, to be honest, but when I read it, I was surprised at how robust it is and how it really feels like a very much company or an entity that's part of the employee benefit plan ecosystem is going to have to be pretty mature to adhere to all 12 of these items. So I was very pleasantly surprised just with you could tell that this was not just thrown out there. There was a lot of good thought into it. You know, you'll see some flavors of NIST in here. So the first step is having that cybersecurity program. It seems pretty basic. That's why it's the first one. And if you look, you know, at the bullets at the bottom here, identify, protect, detect, recover, disclose, restore, that sounds like NIST. And that sounds like looking at your cybersecurity program from start to finish and as it circularly refreshes itself. So just looking for a program that is formal. We've got good policies, procedures, guidelines, and standards. And the 5 pages of this PDF lists off about 20 different policies that you could have in place to help support your overall cybersecurity program. So you move to the next item, annual risk assessment. This is just another example of just the robustness of this program, is that it really is these are great steps for just a risk assessment in general. How do we identify risk as an organization? But if we're looking at it from how are we protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our systems and of our data, and just as you go through a risk assessment, you want to know what is the impact, what's the potential velocity, and are we going to mitigate? How are we going to mitigate the risk? Are we going to accept the risk? So it's just seeing this written down, it continues to speak to the robustness of the effort that you need and should have a real risk assessment process in place that also refreshes itself on an annually or more frequent basis. The next couple, reliable annual third-party audits. Third-party evidence is a lot better evidence than information provided directly from a source there. So inside the ecosystem of the employee benefit plan, having a third-party audit of X, that could be a SOC report. And I mentioned briefly that done a mapping from the SOC 2 criteria to the Big 12, and it's pretty close. And you could add a few controls that are maybe a little non-standard, and you could meet all of those requirements with the SOC 2 report. This could also include just other external audits that have been done, maybe a cybersecurity analysis, just a more narrow focused, maybe a penetration test or vulnerability analysis. So anything done by an outside party is going to be more reliable evidence and easier to provide to the DOL should they come calling. Briefly for number 4, what they also want to see is that there's good tone at the top. You should be sensing governance throughout this. We've talked about it already without saying it, but good governance. And do we have a CISO? If we don't have a CISO, who's in charge of managing the information systems? Who is that person, the right person to do that? What are their credentials? For the IT auditors in the room, access control procedures right out of the standard playbook, and just good protection for yourself is good complex passphrases that have a good length with MFA all day, like you can take that and hashtag that somewhere, MFA all day, and just good passwords are on here. Reviewing user access on a periodic basis, and having policies to monitor. Again, I wouldn't have expected to see monitoring of both authorized and unauthorized activity, but absolutely important and certainly would be present in a mature cybersecurity environment. The last one here popped out and surprised me as well, but it's absolutely true, is that the participant itself should be immutable and should move throughout the environment. It should be the same. So what procedures are we taking to make sure that I have the right address, right? I have the date of birth doesn't change, right? But maybe your name changes. I got that. I've got address. Anything that could change in that file, how are we making sure that that's immutable as it moves through the process? Move on to number 6. Cloud data, right? I'd venture to say that everybody here with us today is using the cloud in some form or fashion. You have a Gmail account, you got an Outlook account, maybe your organization, if it's not you personally, your organization certainly is using AWS or Azure, Yardi, ADP, all these big solutions, hosted solutions that are out there. If that's part of you have a payroll provider, right? If you're in the ecosystem of the employee benefit plan. And so we need to make sure that data is also secure. So how are we addressing those third-party providers that have access to our data? Another fan favorite, cybersecurity training. It's one of those things. I think it's like your parents telling you not to do something over and over. And this is just good reminders. Hey, don't stick your finger in the electrical socket. This is something I tell my 2-year-old right now. Let's not do that. That will hurt. It's just good to have those reminders on a periodic basis, as well as doing phishing simulations. We get a lot of phishing simulations, and I sent one back today that was not a phishing simulation. That was actually from someone really inside of our company. But just being alert, being vigilant, and thinking and then clicking. Secure SDLC, again, another example of that this was well thought out and developed. Is for those that aren't familiar, we've been developing software for a really long time, but at the onset, not really as concerned about making sure security is built in. So if you try to add security on an application that's been out there for 15 or 20 years, it's really hard. It's really hard to do it well. So if we are developing an application, is if we have a third party that's developing their own software, right, that's hosting something that we're leveraging, what is their secure software development lifecycle? What are they doing to ensure that log4j or other types of breach code that's known to be breachable, if you will, is not buried in there? So again, robustness of the program that's asking about that secure SDLC. This is my favorite one, number 9, because I borrowed this term, the Business Resiliency Program, because it combines DR, business continuity, and incident response plans, all in one. And it's how will the business be resilient? Again, is it our part of the ecosystem or the parts of the ecosystem that we are directly engaged with? Shouldn't just have the plan. You should also do robust testing of that on an annual basis, at least, of each of those, and to make sure that you can recover in the face of an incident. Encryption kind of goes without saying. What encryption is in place for our data at rest and for our data in transit. And then the other for the other IT nerds out there, the strong technical controls. And this can run the gamut of things. They're pretty vague on this. They don't list an exhaustive list, but things that we would know, like network segmentation, system hardening, how are we doing backups, what is our patch management policy for our laptops and our servers, what are we doing for our firewalls and our endpoints to make sure that those are up to date with the latest firmware, and have we disabled the admin account, things like that. And finally, we come to the prior cybersecurity incidents, right? If you've got a good plan that defines what should happen, you've got a business resiliency plan as mentioned in number 9, this should be second nature. So if you've had a breach, how did that go? If you have not, do you have a good plan that addresses that?
So we've got some plan sponsor suggested actions. So, what we've been talking about really relates to the service providers. So these are things that the plan sponsor should be doing. Consider adopting a cybersecurity policy, review and enhance service provider agreements, review insurance policies, limits on liability, carry out compliance efforts and ongoing monitoring, require outside IT review and sharing of results, require notification, investigation, remediation, and communication concerning any security incidents, and then mandate compliance with record retention for destruction, privacy laws that are out there. And also, when looking at just preparedness, consider the adoption of a cybersecurity policy, including general frameworks that help you carry out your assessment prudently related to internal security, external security, selection and monitoring of service providers, education and training, breach response, your fidelity bond and cybersecurity insurance that is covering your plan, and just periodic review of all of those policies. Review and enhance cybersecurity terms with your vendors, so understand their standards for handling the participant data and the reasonable use of participant data. So we've seen some service providers get in trouble for maybe using participant data to market other services to them. So maybe they're using participant data and they're sending them some type of health insurance, offerings or life insurance policies. And they get in trouble because it's like, well, yes, it's within your organization, but did you have the consent to share that data within your organization to kind of target them for additional services? The DOL does want you to have an understanding of how the companies are using the participant data that they're holding, and then understand what their remediation plan is, what their independent audits look like, and what they're covered with from an insurance policy. And also, if something happens, whose responsibility is it? We're seeing a lot of the larger service providers offer cybersecurity guarantees. So basically, if the participant is monitoring their account, they make them aware of the breach in a timely manner, then the service provider will put that money back into their account, and then they'll go after the criminals, versus it falling as a responsibility of the individual. Again, sometimes that can be, are you sharing your password with someone? Are you, being unreasonable with the security measures you're taking? So they all look at that, of course, but if you're doing the things that you should be doing, then a lot of the service providers will take ownership of those breaches. The plan sponsor should request that each of the following fiduciaries and service providers complete a questionnaire at a minimum. Again, I've seen some of our clients and larger clients just taking those big 12, sending those in a question format to their service provider to say, hey, what are your policies and what are you doing around these 12 areas? Basically, the access to the assets, so the record keeper and the custodian, that's where you're going to see the most risk, because that they can get access to the funds at that point. With a third-party administrator, payroll provider, more of the access there is limited to PII type information. So, looking at the SOC 2, a lot of the payroll providers are offering those, and just understanding how they're maybe encrypting the data that they're obtaining or that they have. They did, as we mentioned, come out with a policy for the individuals and what individuals should be doing to protect themselves. So the plan sponsors at a minimum should be communicating these best practices to participants. So for individuals, they need to register, set up, and routinely monitor their online accounts, use strong and unique passwords, use multi-factor authentication, keep personal contact information current, close or delete unused accounts, be wary of free Wi-Fi. So don't be logging into your retirement account while you're sitting at Starbucks. Beware of phishing attacks, use antivirus software, and keep apps and software current, and know how to report identity theft and cybersecurity incidents. A lot of the record keepers do kind of lay out those steps on what to do if you notice something going on with your account that you need to notify them about. Plan sponsors, we've talked a lot about service providers. It's a great practice to self-assess yourself against the Big 12 also. Obviously, a Fidelity and 𝗪𝗏, those are large organizations. They can have very formalized IT risk assessments and policies and procedures based on the size of the plan sponsor. Again, those requirements might be scalable based on the size of the organization, but still need to be aware of the risk and addressing those risks to the best of their ability. Again, we've used the term record keeper custodian. If that's not, already, they should be looking at these Big 12 best practices. They should have a third party perform an audit assessment. So these SOC 1, SOC 2s. A lot of the bigger record keepers are getting in front of this and know that these questions are going to be coming. So they're putting out either really detailed information on kind of how they address each of the Big 12, or there's a race out there to, now we need a SOC 2, so let's get a SOC 2 done. So a lot of them, we're seeing a lot of movement in the marketplace. Third-party administrators should also be assessing against those 12 best practices. Payroll providers, if they don't have a SOC 2 already, if you ask your payroll provider for a SOC 2 and they don't have one, there are a lot of payroll providers out there that offer them. So find one that does if they're not willing to jump on that bandwagon.
And thank you for this opportunity to speak.
And more information on all of this is on the Department of Labor's website. So if you're interested in diving into their cybersecurity best practices, you can go on the Department of Labor website.